Imagine dropping a camera into an American lake and finding a road, not a trail carved by water, a real road. Painted lines may be gone, but the route still runs between hills that became islands. Follow it far enough, and it can lead toward foundations, bridge remains, churchyards, and places where families once lived ordinary lives. Above them, people now fish, swim, and pull boats across water that did not exist when those roads were built. Thousands of American lakes are reservoirs, valleys deliberately flooded behind dams. Before the water arrived, houses were purchased, residents were moved, trees were cut, and graves were often relocated. But clearing an entire valley is almost impossible. Concrete foundations remain, stone walls remain, roadbeds remain, and in several lakes even cemeteries or their markers were left beneath the water. These are the roads, churches, graveyards, and entire communities hidden beneath America's lakes. And the first one has already returned from the bottom. In the Nevada desert, the ruins of St. Thomas once sat beneath Lake Mead. Before there was a reservoir, St. Thomas was a small settlement near the Muddy and Virgin Rivers. It had farms, homes, businesses, and a position along a travel route between Los Angeles and Salt Lake City. Then, Hoover Dam changed the geography of the Southwest. As the Colorado River backed up behind the new dam, Lake Mead spread into valleys that had never held a lake. Residents of St. Thomas sold their property, dismantled what they could, and watched the water move closer. On June 11, 1938, the town's last remaining resident, Hugh Lord, left his home by boat. Eventually, water covered the streets and foundations. For decades, St. Thomas existed as an underwater ghost town. Boats passed above a place where people had once walked to stores, tended fields, and visited neighbors. Then, Lake Mead began falling. Years of drought and heavy demand caused the shoreline to retreat. The water released St. Thomas, exposing concrete foundations, broken walls, roads, and traces of the settlement that had disappeared beneath the reservoir. Today, visitors can walk through parts of the old town site. That reversal makes St. Thomas unusual. Most drowned towns stay hidden. Here, the lake temporarily gave one back. But in California, another community remains beneath one of the state's most famous reservoirs. Before Lake Berryessa existed, the Berryessa Valley held the town of Monticello. It was not an abandoned mining camp or a forgotten collection of cabins. Monticello was a working agricultural community with farms, homes, businesses, roads, and a cemetery. Then the federal government approved the Solano Project, which included construction of Monticello Dam. The dam would provide water and flood control, but the reservoir behind it would consume the valley. Around 250 residents were relocated. Buildings were removed or demolished. The town cemetery was moved to higher ground near Spanish Flat. But the landscape itself could not be carried away. When the dam was completed and the valley flooded during the 1950s, Lake Berryessa spread across the former town site. Roads, property lines, foundations, and parts of the old transportation network disappeared beneath the surface. One substantial bridge was reportedly left in place because removing it was considered too difficult. That means a boat crossing Lake Berryessa may pass above the route people once used to enter Monticello. The cemetery was moved, but the town beneath it was not. And that distinction matters because legends about flooded reservoirs often claim that entire graveyards were casually abandoned. In reality, major reservoir projects usually made serious efforts to identify and relocate known graves. The difficulty was knowing whether every burial had been found. Family plots could be small, poorly documented, or marked with wood and fieldstone instead of permanent headstones. Records were incomplete. Some graves had been forgotten even before the dams were planned. At Lake Lanier in Georgia, that uncertainty became part of the lake's dark reputation. Lake Lanier was created in the 1950s when Buford Dam blocked the Chattahoochee River. The project flooded tens of thousands of acres. Farms, roads, bridges, communities, and former settlement sites vanished beneath a reservoir that would later become one of America's busiest recreational lakes. Before flooding, crews relocated buildings where practical and moved known graves from family and church cemeteries. Historical accounts indicate that major efforts were made to transfer identified burials. Maps of the reservoir area recorded old creek beds, roads, churches, and cemetery locations. But Lake Lanier's bottom was not stripped clean. Old roadbeds, building remains, tree stumps, and other structures stayed in the valley. During severe droughts, receding water has exposed pieces of the former landscape, including road signs, masonry, and steps. Sonar can reveal straight lines and hard edges where nature would normally create irregular shapes. Those remains have helped fuel stories that Lake Lanier is haunted or cursed. The lake has experienced numerous drownings and boating accidents, and the submerged landscape is often blamed. The real hazards are less supernatural. Old trees, walls, roads, and sudden drop-offs can create dangerous underwater obstacles. Heavy boating traffic, limited visibility, alcohol, and deep water add far more immediate risk than ghost stories. Still, the idea is difficult to forget. A modern speedboat can cross above an intersection that once guided cars through a valley. A swimmer can enter water above the foundations of a vanished building. And somewhere beneath the lake are former church and cemetery sites that were mapped before the water arrived. In South Carolina, one cemetery is not merely a rumor. Lake Jocassee is known for unusually clear water, steep mountain scenery, and some of the deepest recreational diving in the region. The lake was created during the 1970s when valleys were flooded for a hydroelectric project. Roads, camps, homes, and other structures disappeared into deep water. Among the most famous sites beneath the lake is the old Mount Carmel Cemetery. Before flooding, many graves were exhumed and relocated, but the physical cemetery did not disappear completely. Headstones, stone curbing, and other remnants remain approximately 138 feet below the surface. Advanced divers can descend into cold, dark water and find the outlines of a burial ground where a church community once laid its dead to rest. At that depth, sunlight has weakened. The surface is far above. The cemetery is no longer surrounded by grass, trees, and roads, but by open water. Fish pass between markers. Sediment settles on stones that were never designed to remain underwater. The nearby community and church are gone. Yet the cemetery still marks where people once gathered, worshipped, and buried generations of family members. Lake Jocassee hides other remains at even greater depths, including former camps and lodges. Some structures stand hundreds of feet below the surface, preserved in cold water that few divers will ever reach. But one of the clearest examples of an actual submerged burial ground lies beneath Waco Lake in Texas. A cultural resources report prepared for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers identifies Massey Cemetery as a burial site now submerged beneath the reservoir. Before Waco Lake expanded, the cemetery was located near the community of Spiegelville. Unlike a legend passed between fishermen, the site appears in official historical documentation. The water above it is now part of a large flood control and recreation lake. Families boat, camp, and fish nearby, usually with no reason to imagine a cemetery beneath them. What remains at the site today is difficult to know without archaeological investigation. Water, sediment, and decades of change may have covered much of it, but its documented location reveals the scale of what reservoir construction could erase. Not just buildings, not just roads, the physical geography of memory itself. Perhaps the strangest example is Fontana Lake in North Carolina, where flooding did more than cover communities. It cut families off from their dead. Fontana Dam was completed during World War II, creating a reservoir across valleys where small communities had developed around farms, mines, logging operations, and railroads. Roads leading through the area were inundated. Towns and settlements were abandoned or dismantled. Former residents were moved away from land their families had occupied for generations. Many cemeteries remained on high ground, but the new lake and surrounding federal land made them extremely difficult to reach. The government promised a replacement road along the north shore so displaced families could return to their cemeteries. Construction began. Then it stopped. The unfinished route became known as the Road to Nowhere. Today, it ends at a tunnel in the Great Smoky Mountains, far short of the communities and burial grounds it was intended to reconnect. For decades, families have crossed Fontana Lake by boat and continued on foot to visit remote cemeteries. The graves may not all lie beneath the lake, but the roads that once connected them do. The water severed the link between living communities and the places where their relatives were buried. And that may be the deeper story beneath America's reservoirs. These lakes were not accidents. They were built for electricity, water supply, irrigation, and flood control. They powered cities, supported agriculture, and protected communities downstream. But every reservoir required a decision about what could be sacrificed. Engineers calculated water levels. Surveyors marked property. Workers cleared valleys. Families packed possessions and left homes they expected to keep for life. Known graves were moved where possible. Churches were demolished or relocated. Roads were closed at points that would become shorelines. Then the dams were completed. Water entered front yards, crossed roads, filled churches' former foundations, and climbed hillsides until the valleys became lakes. From the surface, the transformation looks complete. The shoreline appears natural. Trees grow around marinas. Fish occupy flooded forests. New generations arrive with no memory of the land before the water. But the bottom tells a different story. A road still follows the easiest route through a valley. A foundation still holds the dimensions of a family's home. A cemetery marker still faces the direction mourners once approached from. The towns did not truly disappear. They simply became unreachable. And every time the water falls, a wall, bridge, road, or set of steps can emerge to remind us that beneath some of America's most beautiful lakes is an older map, one drawn for people who never expected anyone to travel above it by boat.